My parents texted me at midnight. "We know you spent $520,000 to save our house, but your sister doesn't want you at Thanksgiving." No call, no explanation, just a cold sentence lighting up my loft. So I stared at the screen, typed one single word, "noted," and quietly closed the chapter of being the family doormat. What happened after that? Their perfect Thanksgiving fell apart without me lifting a finger, and that was only the beginning. Before I dive into the full story, hit like and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. And tell me, have you ever been taken for granted by the people you love most? Your stories remind me I'm not alone. For most of my life, being the responsible one wasn't something I chose. It was something quietly assigned to me. I'm Iris Bennett, 34, working in tech here in Seattle, where my days are predictable, structured, and calm, the exact opposite of my family. I grew up in a house where logic didn't matter as much as keeping the peace, and keeping the peace almost always meant protecting my younger sister, Maya, from the consequences she created. Maya was the golden child from the moment she could string a sentence together, bright, charming, magnetic, in a way that made adults hand her praise without her ever earning it. When she wanted something, she didn't ask, she expected, and my parents always delivered. If she messed up, they cushioned the fall. If she overspent, they covered it. If she hurt someone's feelings, they told her she was just expressive. Meanwhile, I learned to stay collected, useful, dependable. Somewhere along the way, I became the one who fixed things. Broken appliances, broken budgets, broken promises. My name was always the emergency contact. Not out of duty, but because the alternative was watching everything spiral. 6 months ago, everything nearly did. My parents called me in tears, voices shaking as they admitted the truth: they were months behind on mortgage payments for the lakefront house they'd lived in for decades. Maya had been borrowing money again this time, draining their retirement fund to cover her impulsive purchases and half-formed business ideas. On top of that, they'd made a few bad financial choices of their own, hoping to solve the problem quietly. They were weeks away from losing the house. I didn't hesitate. I liquidated investments I'd spent 15 years building, sold a rental condo I'd poured myself into, and moved money I'd planned to use for my future. When the dust settled, I had wired them $520,000, no questions asked. My attorney insisted we put the agreement in writing to protect everyone, and my parents, desperate and grateful, signed every page without blinking. For a few months, everything felt stable again. Maya went back to her usual rhythm designer clothes, flashy updates, new career paths every other week. My parents brushed it off as her finding herself the same excuse they'd used for years, and I told myself it wasn't my place to intervene anymore. Still, there were moments, conversations I wasn't invited to, family photos I wasn't included in, vacations where I was too busy to be asked. And every time a quiet thought formed in the back of my mind, I paid for the roof over your heads. Why am I the one left outside? I pushed it down, convincing myself I was overthinking. But all of that restraint, all of that denial collapsed the night they sent that text. The night they told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving because Maya didn't want me there. The night everything changed. I must have read that Thanksgiving message a dozen times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe how casually they said it, like asking me not to come was the same as reminding me to bring dessert. "We know you spent $520,000 to save our house, but your sister doesn't want you at Thanksgiving." Not "we're sorry," not "let's talk," just a decision made without me, about me communicated through a glowing screen at midnight. For a moment, I sat perfectly still. I waited for the familiar wave of excuses to rise inside me, the habit of defending them, of rationalizing their behavior, of shrinking, so Maya could stay comfortable. I waited for the guilt, the self-blame, the voice whispering, "They didn't mean it like that." But instead, something else surfaced. A quietness, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was Maya. Her message was shorter, sharper, almost bored. "It's not personal. I just want a smooth evening. You can be intense. Let's grab lunch next week." Intense. I stared at that word until it blurred. I wasn't intense when I sold my rental property so our parents wouldn't lose their home. I wasn't intense when I covered her credit card mess without airing it to the rest of the family. I wasn't intense when I drove 2 hours at midnight to pick her up after yet another business opportunity fell apart. but I was intense now because she didn't want to deal with the existence of the one person she couldn't manipulate. I felt something unfamiliar climbing up my spine, clarity. I typed one word back, noted, not angry, not sarcastic, just final. And for the first time in years, that single syllable didn't feel like surrender. It felt like a boundary locking into place. It felt like choosing myself. I set my phone down and walked across my loft, the hardwood floor cool beneath my feet. I opened the small safe in the corner, something I rarely touched. Inside was a simple folder, thin but heavy with meaning. Months ago, when I paid off the house, my attorney, Daniel, insisted on drafting a formal agreement. Not out of distrust, out of protection. My parents were emotional shaking as they signed every page. They barely read it. They just clutched my hands and said I saved them. That folder contained every signature, every clause, every timeline, including the one stating they had 6 months to either buy the house back at market value or begin paying rent. 6 months. And Thanksgiving marked the final week. I ran my fingers along the edge of the papers. For years, my family relied on the fact that I would never push back, that I would always be the reliable one, the forgiving one, the easy one. But as I stood there, folder in hand, I realized something simple. They had mistaken silence for acceptance. And this time, they were going to learn the difference. The folder felt heavier than paper should feel, maybe because it held every moment of my family's imbalance, every sacrifice I made quietly, every boundary I never set, every apology I accepted when I should have walked away. I carried it to my desk and laid it flat, the pages illuminated by the soft light of my loft. For years, I'd convinced myself that if I stayed patient enough, reasonable enough, generous enough, things would eventually shift. That one day my parents would see the difference between love and convenience. But staring at that agreement, something settled inside me. They already had all the proof they needed. They just chose not to look. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a pale glow across the room, and pulled up a digital folder labeled Records. Inside were months of quiet documentation, screenshots, payments, bills, bank statements, showing transfers from my parents' accounts to cover Maya's spending patterns. I never collected them to use against anyone. I kept them because I was tired of being the only witness to the truth. As I scrolled through the files, the silence around me grew thick, almost electric. My phone buzzed once on the desk, another message from Maya, but I didn't pick it up. Instead, I clicked on Daniel's contact and hit call. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Iris, everything okay?" "No," I said calmly. "But it will be. I need to start the process." A pause. Then sharper, the house. "Yes, send the notice before Thanksgiving." Another pause, longer this time, as if he was assessing whether I truly meant it. "You're sure I'm done being taken for granted?" I replied. The words came out steadier than I felt, but once spoken, they felt right, solid, anchored. "All right," he said. "I'll prepare everything in the morning." When the call ended, I let out a slow breath, one I didn't realize I'd been holding. My loft felt different, lighter, even though nothing had changed physically. The change was internal. It was the moment a boundary ignored for years finally took shape. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights scattered across Seattle like small promises. Below, cars moved steadily along the streets, people going home unaware that my family, my life had just shifted on its axis. Behind me, my phone vibrated again. This time from my mother. "Sweetheart, don't be upset. This is just easier for your sister. We'll make it up to you later." Later. A word I'd heard my entire life. A word that always meant never. I closed the message without replying. Thanksgiving was days away. Maya was planning her flawless evening, the one where she'd play hostess, bask in attention, and pretend the world revolved around her. My parents would orbit her as usual, smoothing edges, protecting her image, ignoring the cracks. But not this time. This time the consequences would arrive at their door, wrapped not in anger, but in legal terms they'd agreed to themselves. And they'd receive it exactly when they least expected it. Silently, elegantly, inevitably. Thanksgiving morning arrived behind a sheet of cold Seattle fog, the kind that makes the lake look like it's exhaling. In my parents' house, however, nothing resembled calm. Maya had been up since dawn, perfecting a holiday she believed would impress the colleagues. She'd invited people she wanted to convince she was more successful, more stable, more accomplished than she actually was. She wore a cream dress, her hair curled in soft waves that framed her carefully curated smile. She moved through the kitchen, barking instructions, fine-tuning the table settings, correcting my mother's placement of the silverware, reminding my father to act natural when her guests arrived. My parents fluttered around her, half-exhausted, half-proud, completely oblivious to what was on its way. They didn't know a delivery was scheduled, not food, not decor, not flowers. Something else. They also didn't know I wasn't at home sulking or nursing hurt feelings. I was exactly where I needed to be, someplace quiet, someplace private, someplace far enough to hear my own thoughts without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I checked the time. 11:42 a.m., right on schedule. Back at the lake house, Maya's colleagues began to arrive, a couple from her firm. One of them, her direct supervisor. They stepped inside, complimenting the decor she claimed to have prepared single-handedly. She glowed at the praise, soaking in every ounce of validation. My mother whispered to a guest, almost apologetic, "Our older daughter isn't coming today. She needed space." It was the same tone she used whenever Maya made a mistake. Gentle, shielding, bending truth into something soft enough not to hurt. Then the doorbell rang. A simple sound, but it split the holiday in two. "Mom, get that," Maya said, adjusting her dress. "It's probably the last dessert order." It wasn't. At the door stood a man in a plain jacket holding a sealed envelope and a flat package. "I have documents for Robert and Elaine Bennett," he said politely. My mother blinked, confused. "Oh, that must be something else we forgot to order." He placed the envelope in her hands, asked for a signature, and left without ceremony. No drama, no raised voices, just a quiet delivery of consequences. My father moved beside her, brow furrowing when he saw the legal header across the top. This is from Daniel, Iris's attorney." The room fell silent, not because anyone understood yet, but because they recognized the name. "Open it," Maya said lightly, still half smiling. "Maybe it's nothing." But as the envelope tore open, her smile faltered. Inside were 3 sets of documents, a formal reminder of the agreement they'd signed, a notice about the end of the 6-month grace period, and a summary outlining every payment bill and transfer that had been used to dig them out of financial ruin payments that all traced back to me. My mother's hands shook as she unfolded each page. "Rent," she whispered. "Market value, starting immediately." My father skimmed the text, color draining from his face. "Or we have to buy the house back." "Elaine, this isn't optional. We agreed to this." Maya stepped forward, snatching a page from his hand. "What do you mean, rent?" "This is our home. It's not," my father said quietly. "It hasn't been for 6 months. Iris owns it." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Even Maya's supervisor looked stunned. "She wouldn't actually enforce this," my mother said, panic rising. "She's just upset." But then she reached the final page, the one detailing the timeline. Thanksgiving Day was the deadline. Not next week, not next month, today. And just when the panic began to settle in, Maya recognized something else, the signature at the bottom of the agreement. Her own. "What is this?" she cried. "Why is my name on it? I didn't sign anything." "You did," my father's snapped voice breaking for the first time in years. "You signed as a witness the day Iris paid off the mortgage. You were sitting right there. You said you'd read it later." Maya's face went pale. Her supervisor adjusted his glasses, reading the document more thoroughly. "You said your family situation was stable," he said slowly. "You said you were supporting your parents through a temporary setback." I am," Maya stammered. "This is all a misunderstanding." But he barely looked at her. His eyes were on the evidence packet, the transfers, the withdrawals, the payments covering Maya's designer purchases and failed ventures. Things she claimed were funded by her personal savings. It was unraveling too fast for her to catch. My mother turned to my father in alarm. "Call her. Call Iris right now." They tried. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I watched it silently from where I sat, screen down, not bothering to move. Then my father tried again, and my mother, and then Maya frantically dialing with trembling fingers. By the time my phone stopped buzzing, I had over 30 missed calls. I finally answered, "Hello?" My voice was calm. Too calm, Iris. My father breathed. "We received something. You didn't need to do this. Not today, not like this. You told me not to come," I said simply. "I respected that." My mother jumped in, her voice cracking. "Sweetheart, please, this is a misunderstanding." Maya didn't mean I read everything, Maya cut in, sharply grabbing the phone. "What you're doing is insane. You're ruining Thanksgiving. You're ruining my reputation in front of my coworkers." There it was, the truth. Not regret, not apology, but embarrassment. "This isn't about your reputation," I said. "This is about accountability." "Accountability," she snapped. "You're punishing us." "No," I replied. "You punished yourselves. I'm simply enforcing what we all agreed to." For a moment, no one spoke. I could hear the clatter of dishes, the quiet shock rippling through the room, the realization that the woman they took for granted had stopped playing her assigned role. My father finally exhaled a sound of surrender. "What do we do now? You have two options," I said evenly. "Buy the house back or begin paying rent." "This is impossible," Maya whispered. "You know we can't afford either." "You could," I said, "if you hadn't drained their accounts, or used credit lines in their names, or pretended your expenses were investments." Her supervisor's eyes widened at that, confirming he'd seen the evidence too. Maya's voice cracked. "You're doing this on purpose. You want to humiliate me." "I don't," I said quietly, "but I will no longer protect you from the truth." I let the words sink in before continuing. "This Thanksgiving was meant to be your perfect day, and now you're facing everything you worked so hard to hide." That's what happens when real consequences arrive. I could feel all three of them holding their breath. Then I ended with the same steadiness I'd practiced the night I read that text. "I'm done being taken for granted." And before anyone could speak again, I hung up. Across the lake and the house I now legally owned, the facade of a perfect family gathering had collapsed, not because I fought, but because I finally stopped carrying the weight of their choices. In the days that followed, something shifted in my family that I had never seen before. Silence. Not the cold, punishing kind Maya used when she wanted attention. This was the silence of people finally forced to sit with the truth. Thanksgiving ended in fragments. Maya's colleagues left early, offering polite goodbyes that didn't hide their discomfort. Her supervisor barely made eye contact as he stepped out the door, the evidence packet still fresh in his mind. Whatever image she'd tried to project collapsed the moment those documents hit the table. My parents called again, this time not to plead, but to ask questions they should have asked years ago. They had begun sorting through their finances, realizing how deeply Maya's spending had cut into their stability. Shock turned into shame, and shame turned into something quieter, heavier: accountability. For the first time, they couldn't ignore the pattern. For the first time, they couldn't pretend it was all harmless. And for the first time, they didn't ask me to fix it. I took long walks through Seattle during that week, breathing air that felt clearer than anything I'd inhaled in years. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even relieved. What I felt was something closer to balance, like the world had finally stopped tilting toward everyone else's needs. A week later, my father asked for a meeting. No excuses, no guilt tripping, just honesty. He admitted they'd been blind, that relying on me had become too easy, too comfortable. My mother apologized without framing it as love or sacrifice, simply admitting they'd failed to protect me while protecting Maya. They still didn't know what would happen with the house. Neither did I. But for once, that uncertainty wasn't my burden to carry. For the first time in my adult life, everyone was finally living inside the consequences they created. When my parents finally asked to meet again a week later, something in their voices sounded different. Smaller, gentler, human in a way I hadn't heard in years. They didn't beg or bargain. They simply acknowledged the truth: they had taken my loyalty for granted, and they were ready to rebuild without placing the weight on my shoulders. As for Maya, the silence on her end said more than any apology could. For once, she was the one facing questions, not hiding behind charm or excuses. And standing there listening to my family speak honestly, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, the real kind. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from.